I am going to call this meeting to order with a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Superintendent Skipper, will you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Dr. Phillips? Ms. Krepshin?
Here.
President McLaughlin?
Here.
Mayor Curtatone? Mr. Green?
Here.
Ms. Barish?
Here.
Ms. Batone?
Here.
Dr. Ackman?
Here.
And Ms. Norman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. In accordance with the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, please note that video and audio of this meeting is being recorded and may be shown live on both local access cable television and on the City of Somerville website, and will be available for future use. Future review. There you go. And let's see. We do not have our students here, and we do not have anyone sign up for public comment, so we're going to... Oh, is she? Oh! Okay, we're going to do approval of minutes, and then we'll come back to our student rep. Welcome. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? There's a motion by Mr. Green to accept the minutes of the January 13th, 2020 meeting, seconded by Ms. Batone. Are there any questions? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. Natalia, would you like a moment? Are you ready to go? A moment? Sure. Okay. So I'm going to take things a little out of order here. We're going to move on to the report of the superintendent and start with the coronavirus update. And we have Mr. Kress to join us. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I'd just like to publicly thank the Director of Health and Human Services for the city, Doug Kress. He's been an invaluable partner with us throughout this, and I'm sure for some time to come yet. But I think it's important that he come tonight and at least brief school committee on the initial steps that we've begun to take and what we know about the virus. Thank you, Doug.
Certainly, Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for inviting me here tonight, and I'm going to try and keep this somewhat short because I know you have a long agenda on you and I have other things I've got to get to tonight. This is just a quick update about, or actually maybe introduction for some of you, an introduction about the 2019 novel coronavirus and the disease that's associated, which is also called COVID-19. So I think most people know that this particular strain of the coronavirus itself started an outbreak in China, and it's related to a lot of different kind of markets that are in there. But there is a suggestion that it's coming from an animal to a person type of an infection is how it actually started, and now it's spreading within the human population. Obviously, we know that this has been spreading largely throughout the world now, and I believe it's now in about 105 different countries throughout the world, so it is growing. One of the challenges that we're finding in this is that it's an evolving situation in front of us because we don't know that much about it. We do know that there is no vaccine that is out there. We know that there is no cure for it, and that it is in a family of different viruses called the coronaviruses themselves. There is some new reports, as everybody has been watching on the news. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the information that's happening on our news, and sometimes it becomes a little bit of an overdose for some of us, and all of a sudden we keep getting a lot of that information, and we don't know when to stop and where it's all coming from. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions for you tonight so that you can go through it. But keep in mind that the coronavirus is, the whole family of them, it's a flu virus. So a lot of the symptoms are going to be very similar to the exact same flu virus that we may have, or a flu that people are getting on an annual basis that's around in our community. So that includes things like a fever, a cough, shortness of breath. In some cases, there's also potential of a severe pneumonia. One of the things that we do look at is how long does it take somebody to get it once they become infected with this virus. What we know right now is that it usually takes between 3 and 14 days, and that's why when we talk about quarantine, we leave it at a 14-day quarantine from the time that somebody may have been infected with this. As we know that this virus is spread through the same way that most viruses are spread, it is actually a droplet. So when we're sneezing or coughing, it's a droplet will come out of our bodies, and then somebody gets that droplet into their bodies, and that's how it is spread. How does that happen? When you look at that, if I were to sneeze onto this microphone, so don't touch the microphone, I did not, but if somebody sneezed on the microphone and then somebody else touched it, there's a chance that that droplet will get into my mouth. Same thing with our hands, and that's why one of the best precautions and one of the best ways to stop the spread of this is to really wash your hands and wash it for 20 seconds with warm water, dry them properly. If I were to sneeze on my hand, because many, we'll see this all over the place, people sneeze into their hand thinking they're protecting other people from getting it. They sneeze into their hand, they don't wash their hands, so then they go and they touch things. Then somebody else comes along and touches them unknowingly, and I can look around here, and I already see that since the time I've talked, I've seen about 20 times people have touched their faces already today, or in this time that I've been here today. Don't touch your face. And we're doing that, and that's how those droplets are now getting into our bodies, and then we could possibly become infected. This is not an aerosolized thing, so it's not up in the air like other kinds of viruses that are out there when you talk about measles, mumps, and that type of a thing. So it's not going to really impact us when we talk about things in big spaces like this. If there were only 2 of us in here, it's not floating around the air. It's going to be on a surface, or it's going to get into my body fairly easily this way. It's got to be that droplet connection, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. So we want to protect ourselves in that way. Just so people are realizing what the numbers will look like, we have over 110,000 people worldwide who have tested positive for this, over 3,800 deaths. Like I said, it's already in 105 different countries. Here in Massachusetts, we have one positive case, but we have 40 presumptives. Now, presumptive cases means that those individuals tested positive on our local state test at the state lab. It will go to the CDC, and it will be verified at the CDC, and then it will come back as a positive. We have over 200 people that are being monitored throughout Massachusetts. Currently, we have 13 people that we have been monitoring throughout the start of this here in the Somerville area, but I'm happy to report that we have 0 positives and 0 presumptives. Now, that's of right now. And that's what I know as of right now. That could change in an hour from now, or it could change tomorrow, so keep that in mind. The other thing that we want to keep in mind is our fatality rate is somewhere between 1% and 3%. We still don't know that. Again, this is still something that we have to continue to think about. And when we think about the populations that are most at risk, right now what we're finding from the data is that it's, as you get older, you are a little bit more susceptible to some of the illnesses that are associated with that. And if you have a compromised immune system, if you put the 2 of them together, it's even just a little bit higher. What's interesting about this and what we have seen so far is the effect it's had, the minimal effect it's had on children, pregnant women, and newborns. So that is something interesting. It's different than what we would see in a lot of flu cases, the annual flu. So it's just kind of some interesting information along that line. Then I think the biggest thing that we want to push then out there is the information about how do I protect myself. What have I already said? Wash your hands. We need to wash our hands, wash our hands, wash our hands. Remember, when you wash your hands, it's wash them with soap and water. Oftentimes what we do when we go in to wash our hands, we turn on the water, stick our hands on and do this, dry them, and we walk out the door. Let me remind you the proper way to wash your hands. When you go in, turn on the faucet, warm water, get your hands wet, put a little soap in it, wash them around. You want to scrub your hands for 20 seconds. Some people even say go up to 1 minute, even better. Wash those, make sure that you're getting it between your fingers, getting your fingernails all around. Rinse them in the warm water, go over, take your paper towels, dry them off, turn off the handle, open the doorknob with the paper towel, throw away the paper towel, and walk away. That's what you want to do when you're washing your hands. If you're going to sneeze, if you have a tissue, sneeze into the tissue and throw away the tissue, and then what do? Wash your hands. If you don't have a tissue by you, grab your elbow, sneeze into your elbow, but when you're doing that, make sure that your nose is into the crooks of your elbow. You're not going above or below it, because then it's not going to do you any good. You want to make sure that you're doing that. Some people ask about hand sanitizers. Yes, hand sanitizers do help in between washing your hands. So if you're going to do that, take the hand sanitizer, put it on your hands, and you rub it. Don't go like this after a couple of seconds. Make sure you rub it until that dries. That's going to activate everything that's in there, and it's also going to get around your hands. And then finally, whenever you're around different things, routinely clean your desk or your office space or whatever you are touching. If you're in your car, wiping your steering wheel off with a wipe of some sort. In this area, wiping these things off. Wiping off of your computer. One of these things. If you have one of these things can carry a lot of germs. And where do we set it down? Where are your phones right now? If it's not in your pocket, if it's sitting on your desk, is it possibly getting some additional things that might be germs and everything else that are on there? So you want to make sure you wash that. Now, keep in mind that is glass. Alcohol on glass or Clorox or any of those other things on glass sometimes can damage it. So please check and see what you're using to wash some of those things, because I don't want you to damage that. And then finally, if you're feeling ill, if you're having any of those symptoms, if you're feeling sick, please stay home. I know your jobs are very, very important, just like my job is very, very important. But if you're sick, it's better to have you back in a couple of days than not being out a long time and then spreading that around. So please, if you're sick, please remember to call in sick. There's one question that people keep asking a lot about, and that's about those masks. Should I be wearing a mask to protect myself? It's not going to help that much. When you're doing that, remember, and just pull up the videos of people watching this on a variety of YouTube stations. Wear the mask. They're like here to here. So your nose is exposed. If you sneeze, what's going to happen? It's just going to come out your nose. So you have to wear them properly. It's better if you are sick to wear that mask. I'd rather have it there because why? That's going to protect everybody keeping all of that inside of their mouths. So if I am healthy, it's not going to do me any good. But if I am sick, put it on. Better yet, stay home and get better so the rest of us can also enjoy you as well into the future. So we do know that there are some travel policies that are out there, and we have looked at those for any of our school entrances and any other types of things that are happening. We do have 5 countries where there are different grades of travel advisories out there, whether that's 3 or 2. So we have all of that guidance available on our website, and we will continue to keep that updated on the website whenever you're there. Lastly, remember that this could have a big impact on our community. We've seen what has happened in a variety of other countries, whether we're talking about China, or even most recently, if you look at what's happening in Italy. There could be possibilities of people being isolated or quarantined. We can certainly get into that, but I think most of us know what that is. We may have to think about temporary closures. What would happen with that? What impact does that have on us? If people decide not to stay home and continue to spread any kind of viruses, there's a chance that that actually have an impact on our workforce because more and more people will get sick. How are we going to deal with some of those things? Think about your daily living and how often you're interacting with other people or how often you're relying on other people to do things, whether that's going to the supermarket. What if there are not enough cashiers to get that? What happens if there are not enough truck drivers to get there? That will all have an impact. So your best way to slow this particular infection is to use those precautions. Wash your hands. If you're sick, stay home until you're healthy. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any specific ones regarding the district or things that the city is doing. I'm happy to say that the city does have an emergency response team put together. We are putting plans in place so that we are ready to respond for the event of this moving forward. With that, I'll take questions.
Are there any questions? Dr. Ackman.
I'm curious specifically, and this may be to Superintendent Skipper or Mr. Kress, what is the plan specifically for the medically fragile students we have? Because my understanding, like you said, is that most kids are not vulnerable, but I would presume that they're more susceptible.
Through you, Madam Chair, we are taking precautions in that within the SKIP program, specifically up at Kennedy School. We've been talking to the nurse and making sure that we are following the same precautions that we have. Again, anytime that we're talking about this virus, it's the same precautions that we're taking with the flu virus and everything else. So we are beefing that up a little bit more with some additional cleaning and making sure they have the supplies that they need.
Mr. Green, and then I'll go to the superintendent. Oh, was that,
No,
did you have more you want to add to that?
I can answer after.
Okay.
So, through you, Madam Chair, just to the superintendent and I guess also to Dr. Kress, obviously this is a fast-moving situation. I know both the city and the schools have work groups how often those working groups touching base? Just
Through Madam Chair, so the city one, we're actually moving to an every other day. We're in constant contact. I texted and spoke with Doug multiple times over the weekend. The committees themselves for the school district, our emergency response team, is meeting weekly and then as needed. But we do have a group text that we've set up, so we're in constant communication as information comes out. We're circulating it. It consists of sort of all the major leaders that would need to operationalize in the event of a closure or some other kind of emergency. I think, what's important in this is that we're constantly processing the information as it comes in, because as you indicated, it is rapid and it is evolving and no one has all of the answers. So I think, we're looking to the state certainly for guidance, both at the health level, but also at the education level. DESE did a conference call last week on Friday with the commissioner and superintendents and our teams. And I think, we got some clarification around the school closure component, which we will be sending out to parents this week. And that is, if we were to need to close school, right now the state is looking to use our snow day policy and add the time on. There's different times of the year when, if and when an absence occurs or a closure occurs because of an emergency. It depends on when it occurs as to how much the district has to make up of the time. The question was asked by a number of us who have been looking into alternative means for credit. And as of right now, DESE is not entertaining that. They want to sort of, I think, look at this and sort of see where it goes. But it was brought up, and the commissioner did say that he would take it under consideration and look at it with a smaller group. To Dr. Kress's point, one of the things that we've been trying to do is to work really strongly in partnership with our nursing staff. We're very blessed to have them in the schools. We work closely in partnership. So they have been going with the principals and administrators to the classrooms and the teachers and talking with the students about how important it is to have, to practice good hygiene in this case, relative to things like washing hands, coughing, sneezes, not coming to school if they're sick. And I think we're also going to be posting signage at each of the schools, which indicates that if folks have had recent travel to any of the CDC countries that are listed, to please call the office, because they are generally in a quarantine, and they should know that, but they may not. And so we want to prevent that adult from coming into the building in that situation. Similarly, our signage will ask adults to be responsible, and if you're sick or have symptoms, don't enter the building. Call the office. We can come up with another mechanism if it's about getting a student to come out. But we really are trying to say this. We want to keep the schools as healthy as possible and our students as healthy as possible in all of this, and staff. We're developing an FAQ. Susanna Morgan, who is our communications director, is sending out weekly guidance to the parents. We will continue to do that. If need be, we will send multiple times in a week. We don't want to overload parents, but we do want to make sure that parents have the most up-to-date information that we have. So I think good communication and trust, which is what we've always strived for in our district, and transparency is key here. And the expectation is that as we know things, our parents and our community will know things, and that holds true both at the city level and at our district level.
And Madam Chair, if I could add to that, the school is one of the team members within the entire citywide response team that we are working on as well.
Mr. Green?
first, thank you for that wonderful response. It actually answered many of my follow-up questions, so I appreciate that. In particular, as you know, some neighboring schools and maybe have closed recently, and the concern has been that perhaps that hasn't been communicated well, what led to those decisions. So it's really reassuring to know that our plan is to communicate on a regular basis and to let parents know as we know, so that whatever decisions we have to make feel transparent and understood and not panic-inducing or panicked.
Did you want to add something?
Through you, Madam Chair, just simply that, I think very similar, not that there's a parallel, but there's a parallel of process with snow closure. And I think, the thought wheel that we developed to show parents each time it is situational, but there are certain factors that have to be weighed into all decisions. And so I think very similarly with this, what our hope is that, we're able to sort of share with the parents as we go along in our community what are all of the situational factors that go into making a decision about a school dismissal, a deep clean, and what that means exactly. And a shout out to DPW, because DPW has been doing extra work to make sure all of the schools are getting extra clean each day in terms of wiping things down that wouldn't typically be the things that would be wiped down. So it really, it's a unified front end. I think it's an opportunity also, because I don't, unfortunately, think this will be the only time that we struggle with this. I think we have as challenging as it is, it's an opportunity for us to look at our systems, but also to look at how do we strengthen communication in those systems for the event of whatever the future holds.
Thank you. Ms. Patone and then Ms. Krepchen.
Thanks to both Mr. Kress from the city and the superintendent's office and administrators for really having to, in a short period of time, come together with good planning as well as really detailed communications. And we've had some excellent communications coming from the superintendent's office, so thank you. So through the chair to the superintendent, there's a reference in the last communication about something called the Enrollment Center Protocol, where people are being asked to report in illnesses. But it's a little unclear in the letter as well as on the website when you link to it. So that's a little feedback to figure out, maybe also giving you an opportunity to share a little bit more about what that is and what that means.
Through Madam Chair, so certainly, yeah, it's a great question, and I'll take the feedback and give it to Susanna so we can strengthen it. I think the Enrollment Center is tasked with a very unusual situation in that they're receiving families often who are new to the district. And so, the students that are here, we have a history of through the registration process, whereas we have families that will literally be new to Somerville, sometimes new to Massachusetts, and just come in. There is a protocol by which students and families see the nurse, the city nurse, that is stationed at the enrollment center. And one of the things that we wanted to message was that if someone had recently traveled, that it would be important first for them to see the nurse. And that way the nurse has masks. It also indicates if you have any symptoms of any kind of sickness or illness, rather than come in and expose the staff to that, they can put a mask on and then be examined by the nurse so that we can ensure the safety of the folks that are in the enrollment center. And that would hold true in the buildings too, that, again, what we're asking is people just to use precaution, whether it's the flu or coronavirus or any kind of illness, the goal is to not spread it. So, if you know you're sick, if you know you have symptoms of something, put a mask on and then the nurse will evaluate, and through questions, which I'm sure Doug can, elaborate on, be able to ascertain whether or not the person poses any kind of a health risk and then give appropriate information.
Thank you. Ms. Krepchen?
Thank you for all of this information. I had a question for Mr. Kress through you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that it seems that kids are less affected overall, and I was just curious if you knew of the 40 presumptive cases in Mass, how many of them are kids?
Through you, Madam Chair, 0. So far, the cases that we know about and the ones that we are looking at, they are either related to travel, in past travel, or related to the area of the Biogen issue that we have right now.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the superintendent. We've been hearing a lot about the importance of washing our hands. I've never washed my hands so much in my life, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little more about how we're supporting teachers to build in time for hand washing into their regular classes when there are so many kids in our schools.
Through you, Madam Chair. So, really it's to try to get them to use time. That would be the transitional time. So if students are about to eat, students return from the bathroom, students are in any kind of an activity where they've been touching things and a lot of things, there will be reminders to wash your hands and the importance of it. The nurses have been going around with principals and admin to demonstrate. There's also a video that's been shared to say this is, the appropriate way, as Mr. Kress suggested. It's a couple of the schools, they've even gotten creative enough. There's actually a science experiment which shows, through UV, kind of what's left on your hands unless you actually really get every nook and cranny of your hand. So I think the goal is really to just continue to talk to the students about it and to remind them. And, of course, we couldn't do that without the teachers. So the teachers have been incorporated with the nurses as part of that educational team.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, I
Mr.
just want to
Kress.
remind people that if anybody does have additional questions, we do have a website if you go to the city's website, right there we have a special page just on the coronavirus, and we update that very frequently, usually about every single day, sometimes twice a day, with any additional information that we have available. And I agree that this is an evolving situation. We have things that are coming out all the time, so we want to thank you for your participation in this and making sure that we can slow the spread of this particular virus, and thank you for your time tonight.
Well, Mr. Kress, thank you so much for your time. We know you're very busy, but I really want to thank the city staff, central office staff, and our school-based staff, because the amount of time that is going into the day-to-day, how do you get students to wash their hands, to the planning, it's massive, and it's deeply appreciated. Hopefully, it'll curb the effect in Somerville. But I would also like to take this moment to encourage my colleagues to think, take a moment before, if you have a request for more information or to move something forward, to be very mindful that our staff already a very full time of the year at a new high school and many other challenges, but this is very time consuming, and hopefully we'll move forward. And the preparations will just be good planning for the next time, but the amount of time, I cannot overstate it. It's been hours and hours every day for all of the central staff, school-based staff participating in the city. So we all are deeply appreciative, but also want to be very mindful of your time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Natalia, are you ready to go now? Do you need a little more time?
Yes, but I had a question first.
Sure. Oh, Natalia, anytime you have a question, you just put your hand right up there. Thank you. So this is our student rep.
Good evening. This information was very informative to me, and I was wondering how we can get it out to the student body, because there's this large misconception about the coronavirus, and because this generation is so influenced by the media, we have not good information. So I've heard here through the people calling out students of Asian descent, saying, oh, you have the coronavirus, you have this, you have that. And I just want the student body to be well informed on what's actually happening in Massachusetts. So I was just wondering how we can get it out to the student body.
Through you, Madam Chair, actually, that's the best question tonight, so thank you. And I think that's an important thing of how do we get this information out and we get the facts out and not some of those rumors that are going around. So perhaps we can work with the district and actually get that out to all the students, especially at the high school, and getting information out there. We are also starting off trying to get some different kind of hashtags and social media activities going on, and if you could help us promote that, that would be fantastic, especially getting into some of those areas. It'll be about washing hands, and also it's just kind of know the facts. I think you said an important piece there as well about anybody can get this virus. It just happened to start in one particular country and of Asian descent. We often have heard that. We've heard that in the news as well. It can impact anybody. This can affect anybody. Anybody can get infected with it. It's about getting those droplets into your body. So I think that's an important thing that we always talk about, is that this is open to everyone. However, we have seen some that are at lower risk. Believe it or not, people like me are a little bit more at risk than people, than younger people, because I'm a male. If you really want to look at the data, it's males who are over the age of 50. And for some, it's even more so if they have a compromised immune system. So when you have anything like that, you're a little bit more at risk of actually having some of those challenges. So we need to get that information out there. So I appreciate that. And we'll work with you to help kind of spread that word, and we can work with the superintendent and the school district communications to get some of that out there. We are always interested in coming into classrooms and doing discussions as well. So anybody who wants something along those, we have a team of people who are willing to do some of that education as well.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it's a terrific idea. I think, this has evolved so quickly that I think, the focus has been on just the basics. But you know, I'm sure there's a lot of the data that Mr. Kress gave would be of interest to our students, particularly the high school students. So I think a PSA could be wonderful about it. We could, you know, talk with Mr. LaFosse to see if that's possible. We can utilize the health classes for sure to go a little bit more in depth on it. And I think I would welcome student government, you know, sharing with us what they think would be the best way to message it so that students actually get the facts. Because it is evolving, and it, you know, it's, you know, sometimes every challenge it offers an opportunity, and I think this is one for our community to come together around and to make sure that everybody has the information to keep themselves safe. So let's work offline on that and see how we might be able to engage the high school students in a little deeper way.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank
Do you
you,
have another one?
Director Kress. I'm sure you have other things to go to. Your day is not over. No, thank you so much. Do you want to give your report now? Okay. If you could scooch that computer a little bit, or scooch your chair so we can see you. Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Today's report consists of the upcoming ELA MCAS, the 24th to the 25th of March, specifically for sophomores. Preparations have begun in classes, such as practice essays and tests to help make students feel more comfortable. The student body has shown not much concern. MCAS has been with us since the 3rd grade. Next is the spring sports have officially begun. Clearances next week, and the following weeks, sports will begin to have games and regular practices. As You Like It, a play by the Highlander Theater Company, is next week, and some of our high school students have worked on for weeks, and I'm looking forward to the event. Last but not least, the semi-formal is this upcoming Friday, the 13th. Class of 22 and 21 have been selling tickets and just trying to get the student body excited. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Green has a question for you.
It's not for you, actually, it's for the superintendent.
Okay.
But so, putting aside the fact that I'm not a fan of MCAS, I would hope that during the DESI call, there was some conversation as to what happens for especially our sophomores who need to pass MCAS to graduate if there are school closures this month through the coronavirus, and
Yeah.
how that will affect, you know, already a stressful time.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the sense I had from the call is that, much like all of us, the commissioner and his team are trying to think of all of the what-ifs, of which there are very many. What he made a commitment to was to continue to hear what the questions are and then to take his appropriate groups and make some decisions around it. One big question that came up, MCAS wasn't as big of a topic as you would think. It was brought up, and I think the response was that right now we will sort of look on a case-by-case basis, since not many districts have had to have a closure yet. That could obviously change drastically. I think the bigger question, or one of the questions that came up, was around chronic absenteeism. So on the one hand, you know, all absences from the state's perspective is an absence, and regardless of whether it's excused or not, and yet we find ourselves in a situation where students may need to quarantine themselves for 14 days and then be well on their way to being chronically absent. And so that obviously, through the accountability system, has a factor in the overall district accountability. So I co-chair the AAAC, and so I will be bringing that topic to the AAAC, which meets March 18th, to see what kind of relief that could be.
Can you briefly say what the AAAC
The
is?
AAAC is the accountability committee that consists of educators, university, union, community partners, and parents. It's a 13-member board that the goal is to advise the Board of Education on relevant topics by collecting information from the field. And the chronic absenteeism is one that we have continually brought up, I think, from the district sides, just with a concern that if students legitimately need to be out and they are in excess of that 18 days, no one ever wants to see that. But if that does happen, given the circumstances, you know, what would be the relief? So I think there's my sense is just in even us trying to think through all the different possibilities, even here in Somerville, it's exhausting to the extent that there are so many. of the what ifs. But, this is why there's teams, so that we can be better thinkers, and it's an opportunity to look at the whole picture. So I will definitely, my sense is there'll be a call on a regular basis. So I am eager to hear this week from the state on a variety of issues, including from DESE.
I have also heard from some more anxious juniors and seniors about SATs and APs and those classes, those tests that are a large number of kids in one spot.
Through Madam Chair. So I think there's, this is part of what Mr. Kress was talking about when he said things are evolving on the policy level. I think we're looking for guidance from CDC and certainly from the State Health Commission as to what those magic numbers are. What is that number that once you exceed it, either by having students or by having students and adults in a room, it becomes more of a risk. And I just think that they don't know that. They haven't indicated that yet. We received, we have a lot of university partners, then we have student teachers and things like that, and a lot of the university partners have sent out guidance that varies from 100 to 150 people in a room. So if there's any kind of meetings or conferences or assemblies that exceed that, they are canceling it. Some universities have gone to the point of canceling classes because the classes would be very large. I just don't think that there's been official guidance yet. And I think as difficult as it is, we have to take this day by day and be able to wait a little bit to get more of that guidance as this evolves a little bit. I also think within the city, I know that Mr. Kress is working on some of that guidance for us here in Somerville, to try to make some, provide good information to the public as to how to say the safest as possible and to our students. I mean, the good news, as Mr. Kress said, is that for kids, for children, this doesn't seem to be as impactful on them as it is for the adults. That said, we don't want to see anybody have coronavirus. So I think this is where we're going to have to be patient, take it a step at a time, know, and for the parents to know, we are literally working every single day to get the answers that we need. And as we get guidance relative to things like big testing environments, SATs, or big events, we will use our best discretion to keep students and staff safe and to follow whatever guidelines are put out.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions for our student rep? Natalia, always thank you for being a leader. Thank you for bringing not just the student perspective, but really elevating the level of conversation both at the schools, but also here at school committee. It's very important. So I know it's a busy time of the year, and it's a school night and a work night and everything else for you, so your time is valuable and very much appreciated. So thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Okay. We are now going to move on to the school improvement plans. We have West Somerville joining us tonight and Next Wave Full Circle. Superintendent, would you like to say some introductory words?
Actually, Assistant Superintendent Mazza has taken a major leadership role in the school improvement plans, so I think I will allow him to have that,
Mr.
that
Mazza,
word.
would you like to say some introductory words?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So as you know, the plan for presentations has changed a little bit. So we have 5 schools that are presenting this year to the full body of the school committee because we think there's great value in hearing all of the great work and some of the things that schools are struggling with. So we have 2 fantastic schools here tonight. We have West Somerville and we have Next Wave Full Circle. So we are really looking forward to hearing what is happening in both of those schools.
Thank you very much. And will West Somerville step up to the podium? You have brought quite the crew with you. This is exciting. This is a long day for our educators, and we love having you here.
Stand up and just briefly introduce themselves, names and their role.
Principal Seward, can you also introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, I'm Kathleen Seward. I'm the principal of the West Somerville Neighborhood School.
Welcome all.
I'm going to do the presenting, but they are definitely available for questions. They let me know they're comfortable with that, so. So as you know, in Somerville, we work on these plans over a 2-year period, so the end of this school year will be the end of a 2-year cycle. So I'm just going to recap some of the things we've been working on and our progress to date. So the 2 areas that we're working on are wellness and academics. And our overall question is really, how do we support every child's social and emotional and academic growth through relationships and/or systems, no matter where they start? And we're looking at that in terms of wellness. How are we supporting children as they learn to independently self-regulate as they progress into adulthood? And then for the academics, what instructional practices and which support and intervention processes do we need to modify so that we have measurable growth for every child at our school? So in the area of student wellness, over the course of last year, as we looked at our data, we came up with these 5 goals by which we are going to measure our progress. And so you can see that this is where we were at the end of last year, and later in the presentation I'll talk a little bit about where we are at the midpoint of this year. So the first goal is we wanted to make sure that 100% of staff understood what the procedure was for referring students to the office, to make sure that there's a good flow of communication back and forth, that staff report that they get timely feedback when a child does have to visit the office. We were also looking at the number of students who had 3 or more referrals to not exceed 10% of our enrollment. The rationale for that being is that students are going to have struggles in school, but people who are repetitively having struggles and having a hard time, that's more time out of class, and making sure that we're limiting the number of students who are having consistent referrals. And then we looked at this group of students who have 6 or more referrals and looking at decreasing that by at least 25%. And one of the things we started looking at last year is we looked at our rates of referral by different demographic subgroups and identified that there were some gaps, some differences about the rate of referral, and so we wanted to make sure that when we looked at our rate of referral, it was within 5 percentage points of what the actual demographic makeup of our school was. So this is just a look at our overall office referrals in the period that we've been looking at this data. As you can see, they've gone down overall, and then particularly lunch and recess, which is an area that we worked on refining some procedures. We really saw a big decrease in the number of referrals over time by making some adjustments. And one of the benefits of really looking at this data is we can see exactly when it's happening, what time of day, what grade level, so we can really think about what needs to be adjusted to help kids be more successful. And this is looking at our students who have either 3 or more referrals or 6 or more referrals and kind of how that number has changed. These are not necessarily the same students every year because sometimes students come and go, but it's just the number during each of those years. And then this is our end of last year data. I shared this data last year when we presented it around this time of year and identified that there was a gap specifically in our male, their percentage of the school being 51%, but that last year they made up 73% of the referrals. Also our black students, last year were 12% of our school and 25% of our referrals. And then our special education students, 23% of our school and 35% of our referrals. So we were really trying to think about how do we address this, because these gaps really should not be there. And that's part of our equity plan as a school and a big part of our professional development that we've been doing this year. So what are some of the things that we did to address all of this data? One thing that we did differently this year is that our counselor educator started the year with caseloads of students. So we looked at students from the prior year who'd struggled and didn't already have a counselor, either because they're IEP or because they were part of the Promise program, and we developed a caseload for the counselor educator to start from the beginning of the year, working with those students and their families to hopefully support them to be more successful. We also looked at our data for what were the patterns and trends, thinking about when are things happening, what time of day, what time of week, to make sure that we're looking at school systems. We then have spent a lot of time in our professional development this year, identifying unconscious bias, understanding what it is, and then analyzing our own selves for what biases we may have and how that may impact our practice. And then we've also just looked at school structures, like our multi-tiered system of supports, where students, if they're struggling academically, a team comes together to talk about how to best support them. We've been making sure that that process is happening in a timely way and that we're moving forward with recommendations. And then our student support process. And this year, we're really starting to look at what are the race of students who are referred, what is the gender, and are there discrepancies between what kinds of interventions we're trying for different kinds of kids, because there shouldn't be discrepancies based on race and gender. Of course, different kids need different things, but we want to make sure that kids that are coming to these teams are representative of the full makeup of our school. And then we've been looking at school practices and educator biases throughout the year. Also working on getting feedback directly from the students and thinking about what the student experience is. So we do the MCIEA survey, and then we're going to be doing later this month student focus groups for 7th and 8th graders, where we're really asking about school culture and getting students to talk a little bit about what they see as positive and what are areas for improvement. And we think that those groups will go a little bit beyond the survey questions, which many of the survey questions are good, but getting a little more content from students in an actual focus group. And Jessica Boston Davis is going to be helping us run those, so it's someone who works for the district, but not necessarily a school staff member. In terms of classroom and school expectations, 4 years ago, we started using Responsive Classroom as our Tier 1 social emotional for students. And so one of the things at this point is that we need to be doing some retraining because we have staff who were not with us when we did the initial training and the initial rollout. So with support from the district, we're going to be offering this summer a level 1 course for people who did not get the level 1 course the first time around. And then also an advanced course for people who got the first level course but are ready to be retrained and go deeper in the Responsive Classroom content. And also continuing to think about what are the consistency in practices and expectations across settings and classrooms, which is something that we've been working on, but just continuing to look at that, think about what is going really well, what needs to be strengthened. And additionally, we have a cohort of 7 of us who are going through the trauma cohort with Leslie. We'll be completing our coursework this spring and really thinking about how to bring this information to our full staff next year and moving towards considering being a trauma-sensitive school. So I'm just going to go into a little more detail on student support because I talked about that as one of the overall actions, that we've shifted the way that our conversations have happened, where we really focus when we talk about a student is what are the strengths first, what are they good at, what's going well, and then thinking about, okay, what are the lagging skills and how are we going to address them, rather than just starting out with what's not going well, really trying to start with the strengths. And we're pretty good about checking each other when we start into, okay, here's the issue that I want to work on solving. We'll stop each other and say, all right, what are the strengths? What's going well? How are we going to use those to address the lagging skills? And really trying to focus on lagging skills as opposed to kind of a value judgment of who someone is as a person. What do they need to learn? How do we need to support them? What are we going to do? And then also looking at student race to make sure that we're not talking about certain groups, not talking about other groups more, that make sure that we're really just aware of that. And when we have a child who's really struggling, we do a case conference where we need more time to really go into talking about how to support them. So we developed, one of our counselors, a set agenda that we use for all of the case conferences. It's a series of guiding questions. So we really make sure that no matter who's at the case conference, there's a consistency in what the procedure is. So I also talked a little bit about our professional development this year as one of the things that is part of our equity plan. It's also part of our school improvement plan. And these bullets just kind of explain some of what we've done so far in our professional development. And this is what we do when our whole staff is together, which happens for about 12 hours over the course of the year. So these are the topics that we've worked on. And our next step is to really look at developing skills and confidence to implement the knowledge in real interactions with students and families and colleagues. So now I'm just going to show you a little data of where we are at this point. So if you look at our male gap is almost exactly the same it was last year. It's a little tiny bit different, but there's still a gap. We do have a gap with our black students. It is smaller than it was last year, so we see that as progress. And our special education also is a much smaller difference than it was last year. So we see this as an early indicator that the work that we've been doing to be really conscious about this is helping us be more equitable in our practices. And now I'll talk a little bit about academics. So the goals that we're working on was the idea of making sure that we showed growth in all of our students. And the way we're really looking at this is thinking about students who start the school year on grade level or above grade level. We want those students to get at least 1 year's growth. And the students who are not yet at grade level, really looking at decreasing their distance from grade level by the end of the year. Because if you start 3rd grade and you're at a 2nd grade level, 1 year's growth isn't enough. Because if you end the year at 3rd grade level, you're still a year behind. And as you move forward, you get further and further behind, and it's more that needs to get made up. So, for example, a student starting 4th grade on a 3rd grade level, the goal would be to end 4th grade on a 4.5, so that you're closing half of that gap. If you looked at MCAS, student growth would be a measure of that. If a student had very high growth, but were not yet proficient, that would show that they're making that progress to close those gaps. We did not use MCAS as a measure because we don't get the MCAS data until the summer, and it's data from March or April that we get in the summer. So we're really looking at more local assessments, things that we see more frequently in real time, so we can adjust our instruction. So we looked at the STAR testing. Initially, it was for grades 3 through 8, but the district actually stopped doing it this year for 7th and 8th graders. So you'll see that we don't have mid-year data for this year because when we made these goals, we were using STAR, now we're not, so it's something we'll have to think about going forward. And then for the lower grades, we do the Fountas and Pinnell reading assessment to make sure that students really are reading and on level, ideally by 3rd grade. Because any time that you get past 3rd grade and you're not there, it's a lot to make up. So in terms of our action plan, it's really not that different than what I reported on last year, really just looking at frequent assessment in the classroom, which does not mean frequent tests. It means frequent checks for understanding. So making sure that when a lesson is delivered, the teacher has a sense of how kids did, whether they got it, whether they didn't get it, and what needs to happen next. Being really strategic about our Tier 2 interventions and our use of the reading teacher. One of the shifts that we made and we continue to do is really having 1st graders really targeted intensively with our reading teacher. So any 1st grade who's not on level sees the reading teacher. So she has 4 groups from 1st grade. Really the idea being that if someone never sees themselves as a non-reader, that's, you have the academic ability to learn to read, but also the psychological feeling of feeling like I'm a non-reader and everyone else can read. So really not going there with students. And also we know that if a student is in school and ready to learn and sees a high quality reading teacher in addition to the classroom reading instruction, if they're not making progress, then there's a disability, something else is going on. So that we're able to identify those kids quickly and get additional interventions in place. One thing that we're able to increase this year is our common planning time for teaching teams and special educators to meet every single week to talk about planning curriculum and making sure that we're supporting students. We've been having a lot of coaching for our K-5 teachers and even our 6th grade math teacher as well. Working with the Tufts Literacy Collaborative to have some individual tutors for 4th and 5th graders, and having aligned student learning goals so that when I talked about the year's growth for everyone or catch-up growth for kids who are starting behind, that teachers who teach those subjects also have their student learning goals aligned to that. So we're all working together in the same direction. And this is a little mid-year data. Again, you only can see 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. But I'll explain what you're looking at in the graph. In the fall, shows where students were in their reading. So for example, the bottom line shows that students were on average 6 months below where you would expect them to be in fall. And then by winter, that same group of students were 3 months behind where they would be expected to be, but knowing that the winter expectation is 5 months more than the September expectation. So what's really positive about this data is there's a positive slope in all of the lines. In some cases, students started above level, so 3 months above level in the 3rd grade, and then they increased to 6 months above level, and in some cases they started below level and either ended above level or closer to level. So we see this as an early indicator that the work that we're doing is helping students show growth. So that's reading, and that's math. And that's it. Questions and comments?
Thank you so much. I was just looking at the graphs. I love them. I'm a little bit of a nerd.
Well, special thanks to my PTA president who helped me with those because I had everything on a 0 axis, meaning that if you were at 0 growth, you were making expected growth. And he didn't like that because it looked like nobody was learning anything. So he helped me with those beautiful line plots, which look way better than mine.
So it takes a village to make a graph.
Correct.
That's the takeaway.
Same
Okay.
information, but that looks a lot better than the way I was looking at it.
Thank you. Questions, comments, thoughts? Ms. Patone.
First of all, thank you. I was kind of looking back at the presentation from before, and it's very exciting to see how the plan has evolved in the context of the equity work that this district is doing and that you've integrated this in your SIP. How is just kind of like through the chair to you, how do you feel how that's augmented this work for you, just kind of on a personal level as a professional, to add this particular lens to the work?
Well, so I will say, when I talked to Kenya about this for the first time last year, she said, well, what about your suspension rates? Do you have a discrepancy in your suspension rates? And I was like, no, actually, at this point in the year, I've mostly suspended white females, actually. It just happened that way. But it's an incredibly small number, right? The number of suspensions is so small. So I said, well, I should look at just all the office referrals and see. I was like, I don't think there'll be a discrepancy. And then I said, well, there might be between boys and girls, thinking about the data. I think I see boys more often than girls. And I said, well, maybe special education, because we're still really working on inclusion and making sure we're meeting everybody's needs. And then I looked at the data. So I think, I'm not someone who naturally likes data. But the thing about data is that data just shows you a set of facts. And then you have to figure out, are you comfortable with that? And what are you going to do about it? And so, no, not comfortable with that. And I think I speak for my staff that we're not comfortable with that. And so we're working on it.
Thank you. Ms. Krupchen?
Thank you for a great presentation. This is a newbie, just factual question. What is the Promise Program?
The Promise Program is a program at West Somerville that Ms. Smith is going to come tell you more about because she runs it.
Kayla, could you speak to the mic so our folks at home can hear, and introduce yourself again? This is, well, I'm so excited.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Smith, and I'm a social worker. I run the Promise Program. The Promise Program is an inclusion program. So it's for students whose primary disability on their IEP is an emotional one. Most of the children whom I see have an anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder. Some children with whom I probably will be working, it looks like just looking at who's going to be coming in next year, it's for grades 6, 7, and 8. So we start kind of getting kids, looking at kids around grades 4 and 5. Some kids are from the West, some kids come from other schools. Some of the children with whom it looks like I will be working will have like PTSD, sustain some sort of a trauma. And some children with whom I have worked in the past have had autism spectrum disorder. So the way that the program works is I have one-to-one sessions with the kids. We also have group sessions, and those group sessions can be a lunch bunch or they can be a social group that happens. It helps them to work on their social skills. A lot of them have social anxieties and have social deficits. They often don't, especially with like my autism kids, they don't read necessarily people's responses or what's happening. So it helps them to feel more comfortable with who they are within their community too of the West Somerville. We also have programs, so when the kids, when they come and see me, it would be like during X block or doing like a specialist. So they don't have like pull-out time, so they're in class with their classmates, but they also are offered the opportunity to like take a test in my room if they need to. If they're having a really bad day, I have had kids spend almost an entire day in my room with me. There is a bigger version of it, which is the PATH program at the high school. They have, from my understanding, I'm a little bit envious because she has teachers who come in and circulate. So like if I had a kid who was having a day, but like they're coming to school, I'm not actually able to like teach them that curriculum if it's like math in particular. So, but Christy is my counterpart at the high school. She does have people who come in and will help. So that's basically it in a nutshell. Does that answer your question? Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Sure.
Just one quick follow-up. Approximately how
Sure.
many students do you have?
I have 11 students, and when I started 4 years ago, I had 1. So, yep.
Can you, and I know you love that number.
I do.
It brings you joy.
Right.
Because you were reaching more kids. Can you say something over time if you've seen trends or if you see?
Yeah, so I do see, so one of the things, most of the things with my kids are, they struggle to come to school, and then if they do come to school, they struggle to go to class, okay? And it's trying to get that number of time, as much as I enjoy them, of spending with me to decrease. So one of the things that we do, depending on the kids, like we'll have a pie chart. I have a chart. So I have a Google Doc, and one of the things, for example, with a child who's struggling in school to like engage in the class curriculum, we want to understand, is it because he's not understanding the curriculum? Is it because his anxiety is not helping him to do so? Is it that particular class? So one of the things is I will rely on the teachers a lot to fill out a document. It takes them like 30 seconds. There's 3 questions per class. Was he there? Was he prepared? Was he engaged? Was he off task? And we want to watch that pie chart change. So there are each kid has a different goal. How we approach that goal is very specific to the child. It all does involve data. The data that I'm looking at is going to vary depending on what that kid is in particular struggling with.
Superintendent Skipper?
Through you, Madam Chair. And as you can see from Kaylee's exuberance and just ability to connect with the kids, it makes a huge difference for students accepting services as well. One of the things that we're looking at, and we're just at the beginnings of, but it's it's this question of, in younger people, when they have a diagnosis of depression or anxiety, does it manifest differently for different kids?
It does.
Yeah.
So, and what it looks like, so for some kids, that anxiety, it's like written all over their face. You can see them, they're like a ball of like, Some kids, for depression, again, it's like textbook, like you're like, oh yeah, they seem depressed, they're very withdrawn. But for some kids, depression manifests itself in anger and outrage, and so does anxiety, and it also, like in the classroom, can look like disinterest, when really that kid is spending so much energy on like holding it down, you know? So, and then when a teacher will ask them a question, it's not necessarily that they haven't been paying attention or that they don't know the answer, it's just that a lot of they don't have a lot of extra energy, right? So they're like, I can listen, I can learn, but like, please don't ask me to participate because all of my energy right now is going into just holding myself down.
Dr. Ackman?
I'm curious, and I don't know who this question goes to, sort of what is the distinction between the students who you serve and the next wave students?
That's a good question. I think that it would depend on, and maybe Jack can help me. Jack?
I did that on purpose.
Here.
Welcome. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey everybody, I'm Jack Haverty, Special Department Head and Assistant Principal at Next Wave and Full Circle. So we do work together quite a lot. I think there is a natural progression between the kids that are in Promise to Path, kind of like there is a natural progression from Seek to Next Wave, and usually we see that with more consistent behavioral needs in the classroom, whereas your students might be showing some of those less obtrusive to other students' behaviors of withdrawal or just not being able to take in the information because they're so overwhelmed. So our students need usually, typically, there are, you know, it's complicated, but our students typically need more very concrete, consistent behavioral expectations that are every period, every few minutes kind of help, whereas the students that Kaylee sees are typically more withdrawn and manifest in less outward ways.
Superintendent?
Through you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, it warmed my heart to see the collaboration that exists between schools, because this is what we've been working toward, because for children, they're not compartmentalized, so it requires all of us to work together. I think that one of the things we've been attempting to do over the last several years is to really let the students drive what we need to develop programmatically. And I think the origins of the Promise program, and certainly Path, came from a recognition that there were students who did not need a full therapeutic kind of setting, but who really were included, but then they may have periods of time that they needed more the therapeutic and then go for long stretches without any. So I think what we found between the programs is this kind of wonderful continuum that if a student needs more, there may be a referral, and if a student needs less, there may be a referral back. But it's the idea of building all of these programs on a continuum so that no matter where a student is, they're able to find themselves and the supports.
Mr. Mazza, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. This isn't a question to you, so you're okay.
Okay.
You can say, but sure. Yeah. It's just a couple of thoughts I have in general. One of the reasons that we went to two-year plans is because when you develop your goals, you often need more than 1 year to really see the progress. But at the end of the first year is basically your halfway point. And it allows principals to do a deeper analysis with their leadership teams to figure out the root cause and maybe some things that have been missed. So when you see these presentations, you'll see the progression on each goal. But oftentimes in year one, you don't necessarily meet all of the goals that you want to, but that's okay. More importantly, we as principals often have the uncomfortable task of standing up on live TV, talking to you about the data that is not the data that looks great. And it's uncomfortable, and that's okay. It's the acknowledgement that, yes, we have a lot of work to do. And I think Kathleen did a great job, and her team did a great job saying, look, this data makes us uncomfortable because it's not where it needs to be. And we see that there are inequities in what is happening. So I just want to thank you for, you know, being brave to really put that forth, because it is difficult to stand up in front of people and say, yeah, this isn't what we want, but we're working on it, so thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Dr. Phillips and then Ms. Patone.
Another comment. So I'm a social worker too, and when we talk about the history of school social work, we talk about this moment when social work went from being about making schools fit students to students fit schools. And I really appreciate how you guys are working to help kids self-regulate by helping educators figure out kind of what they can do better and differently to work with kids. And I'm so excited to see you addressing issues of racial disproportionality, and probably you've already looked at this, but I really like Russell Skiba's research, and one of the things he finds over and over again is that, you know, we refer white kids for rule infractions that are observable, like smoking or cutting class, and we typically refer kids of color for kind of more amorphous things like disrespect or defiance. Sure. And I wonder if cutting your referral data along the kind of referral and how observable it is or how discrete it is might help elucidate a little bit about what's going on for these groups where you're seeing big differences.
Superintendent or Ms. Seward, did you want to speak to that?
Nope, I was just going to say that's a very concrete way of something that we've kind of started to do, but I appreciate that specific suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Patone?
This is a quick thing. I actually think it's probably to the superintendent through you, Chair Norman. There was just a reference to the change in assessments for 7th and 8th graders, and I'm just curious. I don't want to go in deep or anything, but I'm just curious about it.
Through you, Madam Chair, it was just a decision that because we have so much data in terms of MCAS, that really it becomes more, we're better off relying on the formative assessments that the teachers have developed in the middle school grades, which has been a process for the last several years. So Mr. Harrell has them sort of working on the MCAS data and the formative assessments, whereas with the younger grades, we use STAR as but at some point that may be that we work backward and use the formatives even more so. Because it's data that is more applicable, it's from the ground level in terms of the teacher. It isn't the situation that can happen sometimes in miscue with a standardized test. And you can also give accommodations in formatives that we don't necessarily give or other districts do in something like the STAR.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're using different formative assessments that were developed by
The teachers.
educators in Somerville for 7 and 8. It just
Correct.
doesn't necessarily show the sequencing from the STAR data right now. And you're
Correct. There are
Evaluate
formatives in the
that.
other grades, but I think Mr. Harrell felt that in the 7th and 8th grades, with the sort of the separation too of the math, science, English, history, that it made a lot of sense to move much more toward the formatives. So.
Superintendent, and Ms. Seward, wasn't, the West has been at the forefront of piloting the MCIA work. Is this connected to that project, or is this separate?
So they were at the forefront of, or one of the schools at the forefront of using it. I think there's particular grades that have done it. MCIA is now at the point where it's trying to create a test bank, or a formative, not a test bank, a formative data bank of the prompts that educators could choose from. So as we go down that and the bank gets larger, then we'll be at a point to be able to use from that, for more. But I think what Kathleen was referencing was the actual survey. It was the MCIA survey, which we do in the fall, and then we do those learning conditions, standards for learning conditions in the spring. And that gives us two different slices of looking at data for educators in a different way.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Do we have any more questions for the West? I just want to say the West has a place in my heart, but I also want to say you are always so direct with what you're working on, where you've made progress, where you still want to make progress. It is helpful, it's brave, it's the right thing to do for students, and you do it year after year, and I really appreciate it. I also want to say, both to Jack and Kaylee, and to the superintendent, our student mental health needs are so complex in the district, and that we are coming up with multiple ways so that the services actually meet the kids' needs instead of having services and swishing the kids into them, and it's been a beautiful thing to watch evolve. So thank you so much for your presentation tonight. And yay! And I now would like to welcome the Next Wave Full Circle staff.
Good evening, everybody. I am Margaret Green, the principal of Next Wave and Full Circle, and Jack Haverty, the assistant principal, and also the special education department head. We are a team of 2 tonight. But I want to share a little bit. Our school improvement plan we adjusted last year to really align to the work that we've been doing with the Barr Foundation grant and the Engage New England work that we're doing. So at this time last year, I shared with you our newly branded mission statement and core values. We spent a chunk of last year rewriting our mission statement and establishing 5 core values that we saw as essentially important to our school community. And that work was done collaboratively with our design team, which was made up of staff and students, as well as the entire staff. And it went through many different rounds before we landed here, but I will read, Next Wave Full Circle is a tight-knit school community for students who have experienced academic setbacks and benefit from a personalized approach to learning. In order to meet the needs of our students, we emphasize trusting relationships, authentic learning experiences, growth mindset, and student voice and choice as essential components in our daily work. Our students graduate with the skill set needed to adapt to the challenges and lead meaningful and productive lives. And along with that, we established 5 core values of resilience, empathy, responsibility, collaboration, and excellence. And these 2 pieces of work have been our grounding tools this year as we're piloting some of our new work. So we're gonna share that with you tonight, what that new work has been looking like so far this year. But what we did was define our core values for ourselves, because you can go into a dictionary or Google, because it's 2020, but you can look up words like resilience and empathy and responsibility, but we really define them for what they mean for our school community. And then we've been working on these core values all year with our students, so that they really internalize what it means to be resilient and empathetic and responsible, collaborative and excellent. And as we go through these little wordles that you see are student created that we did in groups in the fall this year. But our grant work and the work that we've been doing with our pilot work is really focusing in 3 areas. The first is our teacher-counselor model. So Next Wave Full Circle has had an established primary person teacher-counselor model for over 40 years, but we really wanted to focus on the structure and the focus that that role takes throughout the school year. We also wanted to focus on community building, which Next Wave Full Circle is a 6 through 12 school, Next Wave being 6 through 8, Full Circle being 9 through 12, but establishing real solid community building opportunities for all of our students. And then the big focus of our work has been on our academic courses and really looking at what do we need to do to restructure them to engage students. As an alternative school for all students in grades 6 through 12, we're working with students who have disengaged from the learning environment for many reasons. And our job is to re-engage them, to get our students interested and excited about learning and to get them towards their future goals. So we really had to look at our academic courses and what are students doing in classes, and we also established a set of competencies for our students, because we're on a journey as we're learning. Moving towards competency-based education is a multi-year process. But just to talk a little bit about our teacher-counselor model, we have a resource team. So Jack and I, our clinical coordinator, Marianne, our guidance counselor, Dan, our dean of students, Francois, we all come together twice a month and we talk about what resources do the teachers need to be effective teacher counselors. And the other thing that we put in this year is really carved out 1 day a week where teachers have common planning time to focus specifically on being a teacher counselor. There's other common planning time on the academic side, but this is really like, what does it mean to be a teacher counselor? How are we supporting students in groups, working towards their graduation goals, and really focusing on our core values. So each week is aligned to one of the core values, and at the end of the month, we award students with core value awards that have exemplified one of those core values. So we've been doing that all year, which is really fun. And that's part of our community building. So once a month, we come together as a full school, grades 6 through 12. We give out awards, monthly awards. We have common field trips. So next week, we have historically been doing a roller skating trip. It usually falls around Valentine's Day, but because of different scheduling, it's falling next week. But that's a time where the whole school goes out and goes roller skating. We have our Thanksgiving annual dinner together. So we're really looking for opportunities to bring the whole school community together, that we're not just Next Wave or Full Circle, but we really truly are Next Wave, Full Circle, and working as one. And then our competencies, so like I said, competencies are, I don't know how many people here are familiar with competencies, but it's been a journey. We've been on this journey for a couple of years. We are getting closer and closer to really embedding competencies into our courses, but we still have a lot to learn and a lot to establish for ourselves as a school. But what competencies are, they're clear, they're transparent expectations of what does a student need to do to complete, whether it's a project, a course, or a diploma. Those are different ways competencies kind of take hold in schools. We established last year our competencies around analyze, argue, investigate, connect, and innovate. And again, that was a collaborative effort between teachers and students to really look at, like, what does it mean for a Next Wave Full Circle student to be competent in their courses? And the staff felt like, well, these are the 5 areas that we want to focus on in our courses. And Jack, I was going to talk a little bit about how we've kind of taken one of our competencies and worked with it this year by looking at student work. I don't know if there's another slide after
Yeah,
that.
it's
I don't have my.
So one of the things that we realized when we were doing the deep dive last year and really like asking students what they thought about the school and getting into it was that we are a therapeutic alternative school, but we were really good at the therapeutic part, and we weren't as alternative as we might have thought we were. So like a recent trip to Boston Day and Evening, students are kind of working on their own competencies. They can move at their own pace. They're getting help. Our format is more traditional, or it has been in the past, more traditional in how you get your credits. You're in a class, you pass it, you fail it, you move on to the next class, but you don't move on if you reach competence. So we decided we have students of all different levels. We need to think about the actual alternative aspect and really beef that up. This is an example of our argue competency. So there are 3 sub-attainments within the argue competency of claim, evidence, and counterclaim. And then you go from, on the right side is basically not there yet, but approaches, meets, and exceeds. And so the idea is that, let's say you're working in a co-taught science history class, you are working on a claim, and you have a rubric specifically designed to that task that you're working on for the week or 3 days or day that shows you where you are in terms of approaching meets or exceeds for that claim. What we've been doing is meeting weekly to look at student work, and really it's not looking at student work, but it's using student work to look at our rubrics. So are our rubrics good enough? So if you look at a video, an essay, an oral presentation, could you still use our rubric of claim to then establish whether the student is approaching meets or exceeds and have consistency with 4 different staff members about whether that's happening? We are about halfway through going through all of the sub-attainments. So we're hoping by the end of the year we will have a pretty good hashed out, the 3 times 6 are 18 sub-attainments to go into next year so that we can see which classes are hitting which, and students can see a real progression of what are they good at, what are they not good at, and have some of that perspective.
I just want to add about the competencies. So Jack, Tim Dunphy, who is our instructional coach this year, but last year was essential in our design team, came up, we did a trip to New York. We learned a lot about competencies. We learned a lot about how schools are implementing competency-based education. And we established what we think are great competencies and great attainments, but until you hold student work up to it, you really don't know if this is really going to work. And so that's been really essential this year. And also, with the BAR grant that we're working on and the cohort that we're in, Next Wave Full Circle is one of the few programs that is an existing school that is redesigning. So a lot of the schools are they're developing new schools. So we're kind of building this ship as we sail it. And one of the big takeaways I had last year, one of my aha moments when we were working on the competencies, a lot of school leaders want to wait until they have it perfect before they launch it to kids because you don't want to confuse students. But one of my staff members spoke up and said, but if we wait too long, because if you roll out a 5-year plan for competencies, for a lot of our students, that's their entire educational experience, especially when you're dealing with high school students. So they miss out on it. And so we said, well, we're piloting, we're trying this out, we're gonna see if this works, and we're gonna look at our student work to see what do we need to tweak, what language, is this student friendly enough, is it really meeting our needs? So that's where we are with our competencies. And the argue competency, this PD that we did in February, all teachers, grades 6 through 12, whether they're part of the pilot program or not, are looking at the argue competency and starting to align their student work to it to see if it works, because that's what we really want to know. That's part of this work that we're doing. So we launched a bunch of pilot classes this fall, which I'll go into in a minute, But the big difference about the pilot classes is that they all focus on a signature experience or a transformative learning experience that is very much like project-based learning. So if you're familiar with project-based learning, where there's a unified question and students are actually doing a project, the big difference with a transformative learning experience or a signature experience is that there's a student exhibit at the end. There's a performance. And so that has been a key component of the new courses that we've rolled out this year. So in the fall, we rolled out a composition activism course, and they focus on gentrification, and the students did a photo essay. So a lot of you are familiar with that, because I know many of you were there and present, because it was here at City Hall in the hallway. Our Building Our Community is a math and social studies course, and they focused on habitat build in Malden. We had a science genetics course called Science of Superheroes, and they were using comic book stories to talk about genetics and what genetic mutations need to happen in order to make you Superman or Spider-Man. That's my simple version of it, but that's what they were doing, and they partnered with Kamikaze and Davis Square to work on their comic books. This semester, because our courses are semester long, we have a health, drugs, and society course, and they are working on editorial writing addressing the opioid crisis. We have a citizens food class, which is a science, health, and humanities class, and they're working on learning where food comes from, being mindful about what they eat, and their end product is going to be creating a mindful meal. And then there's some teachers. I have two of my science teachers who are creating a course called The History of the Mystic River, and are an ELA course that is working on rhetorical writing and on looking at the capital punishment issues. All of those courses, some of them have been vetted through Spring Point schools, so some of these courses were kind of like taking curriculum ideas and running with it and tweaking them for our program. And a couple of them we've created. We created the Habitat class, the comic book class, and the History of the Mystic River class. So those are new. You will see most of the classes that are pilot are co-taught interdisciplinary courses. So this is our way of looking at, well, students are not being successful in school, they're missing credits, they're missing English credits and social studies credits or math, or how do we help students catch up? So some of these classes are double blocks, so students can earn an English credit and a social studies credit in the same course. And we'll get to the data in a minute about what that looks like and if students are passing classes or not. But in the pilot classes, we also changed how we grade students. So we're living in this hybrid world right now of, we're not quite competency-based, but we know our grading for the pilot classes has to be different in order for them to feel different for the students. So on the left is our grading in the traditional alternative classes, how students earn credits in class, and on the right is what we changed for the pilot. So instead of saying you need to participate to get a grade, we want to know what your engagement is. We want to know, are students engaged in the course? Instead of saying you have to do homework and research, where's the growth? Is your project complete? Is there a completion to it? The expectation is that you are doing something outside of the classroom, but we're not calling it homework, we're calling it fits into like growth and creation of the project. So we're doing some different grading going on right now. This is a further explanation of how students are graded. So their credit earning is the same because we're living in two worlds. We didn't want to totally change because some students are taking a pilot class and the rest are traditional classes, or some kids are taking 2 pilot classes and 2 traditional classes. So we couldn't mess with the credit earning system this year. There's some photos here I wanted to share with you of our students actually out in the community. And one of the big things about having a transformative learning experience is this double wow, where students are saying, wow, I learned something really new and cool. Like, that was really interesting. But then also the wow, I just did that. Like, we have a group of students that helped build a house in Malden, and they can drive by that house and say, hey, I framed out that garage. I was there. I was on, putting that together. Our students did go out to Kamikaze. They worked with an expert in comic books to kind of understand, like, how do you put this together? What makes this interesting and engaging? We also got tickets to go see Stephen King when he spoke at the Somerville Theater this year for our ELA students. And then our gentrification course, getting our students out in the community and really talking about this issue that's impacting their lives, living here in Somerville, taking pictures of East Somerville where our school is, and really saying, forming an opinion. I agree with gentrification or I disagree with it, and here's why, and telling that story through pictures. I will say that that experience is, a student came up to me that night as we're showcasing this work back in December, saying, people really like my photos. People are talking to me about my photos. And I said, because they're really good. You're telling a story here they want to know. And this other student said, I feel like an expert. And I just want to I want to replay that moment all the time, because that's exactly what we want students to feel in this, in these courses, these signature experience courses, where teachers can prep and plan, but it's really if the students aren't feeling it, you're missing the mark. The students were recognized. Councilmember McLaughlin recognized our students here at City Hall a few weeks ago and gave them a citation, which was incredible, where our students are really feeling like, my work is not just something I'm doing for school, but it's meaningful. City council members are listening to us. This is impact. And I'm just going to call on City Council Member McLaughlin again, because he also just came to the opioid class and talked about, our students were asking questions about opioids. They wanted the city's opinion on what they're doing about it. We had members from Doug Crest's office come as well and talk to them about what's the health department doing about it, and students are now forming editorials of, and writing what they think the solution should be to the opioid crisis here in Somerville. So it's impactful, it's meaningful work for our students. So does the data say that? We hope so. And Jack can talk a little bit more about the FaceTime. We've been collecting FaceTime data for 4 years now. FaceTime, what we call FaceTime is not just are you attending school, because we can look up our attendance on Aspen, but are you in class learning? So we're looking at how often are students out of class, being redirected, not engaging, and subtracting that from their attendance, where we come up with some FaceTime data. I don't know if you want to add more about FaceTime.
Yeah, quick.
Yep.
So we realized 4 years ago that using Aspen, you can't get a snapshot of whether you're doing better or worse on your student engagement and student participation in class for multiple reasons. The biggest reason is because at Full Circle, there is always a handful of students who are in limbo. And when I say in limbo, it means that they're working with Dan about whether Youth Build or Roca or Extended Learning or the High Set or Scale is the best option for them. And though they're on our rolls, we're not actually expecting them to be in school one day. So we had this issue where it could be at one point we have 7 of those kids in our roster, at another point we have 3 of those kids in our roster, and it'll totally screw up all of the trend data that you're trying to find out if you're actually making any impacts. So we started taking FaceTime data where we are only looking at the kids that we're expecting in school. So we can take our 60 students at Full Circle and realize that 3 of them I know are talking to Dan daily, are going on a tour of Youth Build today, but we don't expect them in first period because they're doing these extra things. So it's really eliminating that outside variance that changed everything. And we found it really useful. I don't know, Margaret, if you wanted to look at the next.
Yeah, so this is the Full Circle data over the 4 years. There is a slight increase, and then go back one.
Yep.
The next wave data, this is month-to-month data, but what then we did do after that was take the whole year. And we're just really encouraged that the trend is upward. That our middle school students their FaceTime is 88%, which means their attendance rate is better than that. If they're out of class, they're maybe meeting with counselors or in our process, a redirect space, but so that's really encouraging with our middle school students. And for our high school students, to go from 68% FaceTime to 75% FaceTime over 4 years feels really encouraging to me, as someone who's been running and working at an alternative program for 20 years. That's the data we want to see. We want to see it moving forward. It's not perfect, but we are dealing with students that have been disengaged from school for long periods of time, so that the fact that we're getting them in the door and we're getting them in class and they're feeling successful and feeling like experts, that's what's motivating me to keep moving forward with this work. And then we looked at our pilot classes versus our traditional classes and seeing students that are taking 3 or more pilot classes are in school more. They're more interesting, they're more engaged, and that work is really more meaningful. So where we're going right now and looking at the equity work in the district, we're looking at, what do our students need to be successful in these pilot classes? What are some of the prerequisite skills that our students need so that all of our students can participate in them? Right now, the majority of the students taking pilot classes are upperclassmen, so our middle school students are not taking pilot classes right now, and most of our 9th graders have not signed up. Students have choice about what courses they take, so that number reflects more of our older students. Some discouraging data, though, and we don't have a slide on this because we're just collecting the data now as this first semester ended, is that our African American students are not doing as well in the pilot classes. Their performance in the traditional classes is better. So we're asking ourselves why. This is brand new data that just came out last month for us, so we're just going to start diving into that and figure out, is it something about the pilot classes? Do we need to redesign? Is it about the prerequisite skills that the students need to be successful in those classes? Why is that data looking like that? I don't know if you want to add anything about that.
Yeah, it was just, we looked at our white population had 15% higher credits earned in the pilot classes. Our Hispanic Latino population had 25% higher credits earned in the signature experience classes, and our black population actually went down a whole 20%. Part of it, we're looking into what it is, but the grading difference is a big aspect, I think, where 40% of our grade in the traditional classes, right? Yep, was based on attendance. So you could be in class, not creating, not engaging, and still be at a 40%. What we've realized is that it's hard for some of our students who have been doing that for a long time and getting by with 60% and passing a class to realize that just being in class is not enough. We need to participate, engage, and grow and work on our strengths and weaknesses. So.
And that's part of raising the bar with our academic programming. So, so that's the next step that we want to take. What do our students need? Because attending the class isn't enough. I'm just jumping to where we were. So of the 23 students who had at least half of their classes in pilots, 70% had improved in class time in the fall. So my last picture of our slideshow is a picture of our staff. This is staff serving Thanksgiving dinner to our students. As fired up as Jack and I are about this work, our teachers are fired up about it. They're coming to me with proposals to say, Margaret, I really want to teach a class about the Mystic River. I really want to teach, teachers came to me yesterday, or not yesterday because that was Sunday, but Friday, and said, I really want to teach a physics algebra class. As of right now, all of the high school teachers but one has taught at least one pilot class. So this teacher who's really fired up about it is bringing along the teacher who hasn't quite dipped her toe in it just yet. And that's how this work has been really rolling forward, is teachers are catching the excitement and momentum from each other. And that is just super encouraging as a school leader to see the staff just really embracing this work and encouraging each other to kind of dive into it. And it's just been really great. So we're looking forward to, continuing on this progress. I don't have a slide on where we're going, but where we're going right now is looking at student voice and focus groups on the teacher counselor model. We want to kind of get students' opinion on, are they noticing a difference? What do they think about the core values and aligning our work to that? We're looking at our schedule because we have so many teachers right now that are interested in co-teaching, that are interested in co-teaching interdisciplinary courses. And so what does that mean? What kind of schedule changes do we need to make to allow that to happen and to allow teachers to have common planning time, especially with the interdisciplinary courses? And then we're going to be working with our partners from CCE and also the Spring Point Schools partners that Bar Foundation has connected us to really map out what does our competency-based education implementation plan look like. Right now, I think we're in a good space than where we were a couple of years ago, but we still have to make some critical decisions about what do we want to do and how do we want to move this work forward, and we still have to make sure that our competencies are what we want them to be before we fully embrace it all. Student work.
Well, wow. The amount of work that you have been doing and the enthusiasm, it's stunning. And it's not just the kids learning. Clearly, the staff is learning and engaged in learning. And it seems like, truly a learning community at all the different levels. And what you are doing there is truly exciting, right? I mean, it's piloting. I would love to see more of this spread throughout the district. This how do we do interdisciplinary but competency-based. Anyway, bravo. Mr. Green, and then Dr. Ackman.
So this is more of a comment than a question. I just think this is one of those moments where we are in danger of doing this thing we do in Somerville all the time, of doing really radical, transformative stuff and treating it as if it's just par for the course. What you're doing right here is where we want all education in America to go eventually, right? Like you are really on the cutting edge of competency-based learning, performance-based assessments, which is where 21st century education needs to be. And it's, simple, but really hard. And so I really appreciate both how far you've come, the challenges you've acknowledged as a former data analyst. My heart sang when you said we realized there's a problem with Aspen, because that was always a sign where I realized that organizations had really grasped data when they could start seeing all the things the data couldn't tell them, because that meant they were actually using the data in a way that wasn't just perfunctory. I've said it for years that I think Next Wave Full Circle is probably the most important school in Somerville, and it's now more true than ever. So I just want to thank you for the truly world-class work you guys are doing.
Well, thank you so much for those compliments. I appreciate that a lot. I mean, it is a lot of work, like you said, but one of the benefits to being a small school is that we can do a lot in a small amount of time. We have a small data set to work with. We have a small staff that can, we're talking about coronavirus catching, but we can catch the fever of, performance-based assessments and competency-based education a whole lot faster, and the excitement of that, there's this vibe and energy. I've been at Next Wave for 20 years. This is my 8th year as the school leader. This vibe and energy the past year and a half has, really been tangible, and it's just exciting to be a part of.
Dr. Ackman?
It was a little unfair to follow Mr. Green. This is just a really simple question. You mentioned, the student attendance and the discrepancies. Are you looking into surveying the students at all about their experiences?
Yeah, so we're planned next week. We're going to be doing some focus groups with students and getting their opinions. We also, part of being a part of the Bar Foundation is they bring in this group called SRI to come in and they did staff surveys last week, they're doing student surveys this week, and I get all that data to see, are students feeling a difference? Is there any change? So I'll get that data probably over the summer, but we will do focus groups and just interviewing students, because that's real-time data that we're getting.
Thank you for that. Ms. Patone and then the superintendent.
I echo everything that Mr. Green shared. I got to see the preview of this in the fall at Ed Programs, and it was incredibly exciting, and it looks like there's even more courses that are being co-taught. Thank you. My question, and this is not at all a critique, or it's more like you guys are evolving this, and I understand, but FaceTime is one of your data sets and the way you're analyzing. It sounds like, I'm curious about sort of outcomes in terms of academic outcomes, whatever that, I'm using that term very generally, whether it's progress on competencies, how you're viewing or analyzing alternative grades or credits earned. Like, what are the different ways that you're looking at that type of data? And you may be evolving this.
No, thank you for asking that question, because I actually forgot to mention one of the tools that we're using. Jack talked about looking at student work to calibrate our competencies, but we're also looking at student work in real time. I sit with teachers just to kind of learn from them about what the courses are about, but the conversation is around what's the criteria that we ask students to do for this assignment? Did they meet it? According to whether we gave them an exemplar or to the rubric, and if, what percentage are meeting or exceeding, and then where are the gaps, and then the teachers plan to either reteach, how are they going to address those gaps. It's this work that we're doing, it's all about the feedback and how do we give feedback to students and real deep feedback to change their work in real time. So the assessment is ongoing. It's every day. On Thursday last week, I observed a teacher, and we're working on feedback loops, and the teacher got to every single kid in the class 3 or 4 times, checking in with them, giving them feedback, looking what they're rewriting. So it's like real-time assessment. We haven't quite figured out yet how we're collecting all that data, but we meet weekly to kind of look at the student work. What do they need to move forward? What feedback do we need to get them forward? But that's part of the conversation that we're having with the pilot teachers of how are we capturing that when it comes to eventually towards competencies, but right now towards those credits around engagement, creation, and growth. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
Is that hand up? I'm going to ignore Mr. Mazza, who I have ignored repeatedly tonight.
No worries. Through you, Madam Chair. A couple quick things. I think, from the onset, your first slide really had a focus on student voice and choice, which I think, you made an intentional decision as a school to include that. And I think a lot of times when we try to recreate or redesign, we do it as adults and we forget about who we're actually serving. So I think, you are definitely the leaders with this idea around student voice, and you had an important reflection where you looked at, this is going to take 5 years, and if we wait, a lot of our students are going to have to go through this for their entire, so you chose as a staff to start the pilots now. I think that was such a great move. The other piece is around your interdisciplinary co-teaching. I think you as a staff serve as models for the district, because we talk about co-teaching all the time, but we're not really quite sure how we get to that and do it effectively. So, in the future, we're going to be leaning on you to help really implement this district-wide, because I think there is true value in that, so thank you.
Can I just comment 2 things? Last year at this time, I presented all the work we did last fall to get here, and a lot of that was about incorporating student voice, running focus groups, doing interviews. Students were on our design team, so they were definitely an essential part of this work. And then as far as co-teaching, that was something very organic that kind of came out of 2 teachers who've been teaching similar curriculum saying, hey, Margaret, can we do this together? And then other teachers liking that idea and trying it out. There's a rhythm to it, and it's, we're still figuring out what is the magic that makes that happen when 2 teachers really click. And one essential thing that we were able to do this year with part of the grant money was transition one of my teacher leaders into an instructional coach who has been modeling co-teaching the past 2 semesters, and so the teachers are kind of learning from him as well how to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Krupchen?
Thanks. Just a quick comment first to say thank you for that great presentation. As a new school committee member, I felt like I really got to know your school. And I have to say, looking at your list of classes, I sort of wanted to take them all myself. So I feel that is a big compliment.
Awesome, thank you.
Just a quick logistical question that I don't know, being new. How often do students come into Next Wave Full Circle and then end up back at the traditional high school, or do they typically come in and stay there for the full
That is
however
a
long
great
until graduation?
Question. That's a great question, because we don't really collect that data very well, but we can go on Aspen and look at membership. So Next Wave is 6 through 8. Students come in varying times in that 3-year span, and we really, talk to students and families to make a decision whether Somerville High is the right placement for them as a 9th grader or potentially a 10th grader. So we really work with them. And kids do transition to Somerville High School. Absolutely. Once a student is at Somerville High and they transition to us, depending on what grade they're in, I've had students since I've been principal transition back to Somerville High. It's 1 or 2 a year, but it can happen. Majority of our students do have an IEP. 70% of our students have an IEP, so all of that has to go through the team meeting, and it's really focused on what supports does the student need. Are those supports at Somerville High? Are they as Jack was describing before, does that student need the support continuously throughout the day in multiple classes? If that's the case, then Full Circle Next Wave is going to be the right placement for them. But, as I tell anybody, Next Wave Full Circle, it's a wonderful place to be, but it's not for everybody. And if you truly need to transition back to the mainstream setting, that's where you're going. I mean, we're all about the least restrictive environment for students, so, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin? President McLaughlin?
Thank you, Chair. Just want to thank you for meeting kids where they're at, which I think is the summary of everything you were talking about, and I thought it was great, both the photography exhibit that we had up here, not just the photos, but the essays I really like too, because some of them I want to tell these kids, man, if you only knew how right you are on some of these things, it's like just seeing the observable world around them, they had great insights that I think, a professor in sociology would have a hard time expressing what they were expressing, and I thought that was great. And then when I got to meet the students, I went to the Full Circle classroom, and I could tell at first, like a lot of them could care less what I had to say. I'm the low-level politician in the room, and it was like, who's this guy? But the second we started touching on a few subjects that were of interest to them, all of a sudden they perked up, and everybody was engaged and a part of the conversation and coming up with solutions to problems that they see in their world. So I don't have any questions, but I really think it's great moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Well, you have a fan club here, for sure. I have seen over the years the deep and bold and innovative, and truly innovative, not, inspirational posters. You really have dug deep and are doing things in very different ways and serving kids in interesting ways that engage them, and that is huge. So I can't wait. I know we're on an every other year circle, but maybe we can get like bonus rounds for some of our schools, because of the work that you're doing, with, especially through the Barr Foundation. And I know it takes a lot of work for the educators. You're putting in lots of hours and lots of thought and lots of care. It's just such an exciting time at your school that we don't want to wait 2 years to hear more. Superintendent?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody has said, but one of the things that has impressed me is Margaret's commitment to leadership development and going regularly to the professional development that's offered through the grant, but it also requires your staff to step up and Jack to step up to allow that to happen. So it truly has been a unified effort in Full Circle Next Wave. I also think that, one of the things that I think about project-based learning, it has huge pluses. But I also think that it hasn't been around long enough fully for us to know who it doesn't work for. So your comments were not lost on me, and I applaud that, you're already looking at potentially who doesn't it work for. And I think it'll take a little bit of time to figure out, is that, is it as simple as breaking it down by race and ethnicity or gender, or is it really about underlying disability? And, because the complexity of students at Full Circle Next Wave, they may have a lead of an emotional disability, but then there's also usually a secondary disability. So I think the district will benefit, and Somerville High will benefit as they enter this next phase, if you can go a little bit deeper in it to see what kinds of accommodations might need to happen for students who, say, have a specific learning disability, students who might be dyslexic, students who might have executive functioning issues, that play out in their kind of disengagement or not being able to get at what's being asked in the project. So I'll look forward to seeing that. I know Director Trevisoni will too, because I think you're really pioneers in the work, and I think you're kind of breaking ground for all kids in the district at the same time that you're doing it for Full Circle Next Wave.
Thank you. And can I just make one comment, Mary? Because your comment that just reminded me that an underlying thing that has been bubbling up specifically in 2 courses we're teaching right now, the opioid crisis and the citizen food, the emotional and therapeutic supports that we are needing to make sure are available for students, because when you're talking about the opioid crisis and how connected students are to that in real time, and then when we're talking about food and food insecurities and just food issues come up, We're also feeling the need to push in on the therapeutic supports, and we are fortunate to have those resources at our fingertips. But that's a piece that has come up this semester that didn't come up last semester that we're being very mindful of, so that students can continue to access the courses, even though it might be bringing up some issues for them.
It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Have a good night, and thank you for a long day. Given, we are all loving talking about students and schools, but given the hour and the amount of work, I'm going to propose that we do the superintendent's report. We will move all of the reports of subcommittees and the unfinished business to our next meeting and move on to the superintendent's report and then go to new business. Superintendent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So really, there's just two other things I'd like to mention specifically, and then a reminder. So one is that Somerville High School hosted its annual Science and Engineering Fair the week before February break. We had 60 Somerville High School students in grades 10 to 12 participate in the event, and as in past years, Tufts University was a key partner in the event. Thank you, Tufts. Projects were scored by Tufts representatives, and projects were placed in first through third, then automatically qualified for the Massachusetts Regional for Science and Engineering Fair. And that, excuse me, was held Friday at Tufts University, Breed Hall. So first of all, just congratulations to all of the participants from Somerville High School. The students, as always, made us shine. But special recognition, first place, Samantha Etow. Second place, Rio Hunter Black and Ira Haxamali. Third place, Hiba Kuti and Manal Kuti. Patrick Walsh, Carmen Rafferty, Louise Caspariello, Kevin Wen, and Emily Howley. So congratulations to them. Honorable mentions, Aiden O'Sullivan, Mateus Anel, Layson River Asaman, and Kevin Arbeza. So just congratulations to all of the students for their hard work. As you know, it's a lot of planning all year long that students do in order to actualize the projects, and the teachers to guide them, and the parents to help them over that finish line. So thanks to everybody for that. I also want to give a shout out to the Somerville High School swimming and diving teams for their recent recognition as the MIAA 2020 Winter North Division II Boys and Girls Swimming and Diving Sportsmanship Award. Both teams were recognized earlier this month at their respective North meets, which were held at MIT. The Sportsmanship Award is such a special honor for our students, staff, and the entire community because it speaks to the pride that our students have in being part of the community and their commitment to having a positive impact on others through their action. So congratulations to all of the Highlander swimmers and divers, their coaches, certainly our athletic director and assistant athletic directors and Principal Lagambina, for setting such a high standard and supporting our students to becoming the dedicated and compassionate leaders and members of our community. And then just really a mention for toward the end of the month to mark your calendar for Saturday, March 28th for the infamous Duhamel Education Initiative Pancake Breakfast, Pancake Flipping School Committee joint event that will happen at the First Church of Somerville. There will be chocolate chips, I will say that now, in the pancakes. That's right. Last year we had a hard time keeping up flipping the pancakes for everybody that came, but I feel confident with Mr. Mazza adding on to the team that we'll be able to do it this year. Tickets are $10 for the adults, $9 for senior citizens, $5 for children, and $25 for a family ticket, which is a bargain. Tickets can be purchased on Eventbrite, and seriously, we look forward to seeing everyone there. It really is a great event. Duhamel's been such a great partner for us in all of our dropout and engagement initiatives throughout the district, so really do look forward to that on the 28th. They are also, as a note, partnering with the Somerville High School PTA, and they'll be collecting new and gently used men and women's formal wear for students who want to attend the Somerville High School prom, but may need some assistance. So items such as dresses and accessories, suits, ties, shoes, anything that is lightly used that could be donated would be appreciated as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you much for that, Superintendent Skipper. Again, we are going to move the reports of subcommittees to our next meeting. We are also going to move the unfinished business one, the lateness of the hour, but also we have not heard back from council on the final language review. So with that, we will move on to new business. There was a question from one of our members from today about how does policy get initiated. So in this case, this is a policy that we created last year or the year before, gender identity support for staff. It recently became, was brought to Ms. Batone's attention that there's fairly minor but important language that needs to be included, and so we are not going to be voting on it. We're introducing the idea of it tonight, unless there was no question and we felt confident. I guess we could vote on the first reading. But Ms. Batone, can you introduce the subject and give a little background and the change of the language and the significance of what the amendments you are proposing are?
Sure.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of conversation about restrooms, and for our students and staff who don't necessarily identify traditionally with gender, and whether or not, we introduced these new policies, I think it was last year, or no, the year before, 2018, one for staff and one for students. And the one for students has this additional language about using facilities or restrooms that correspond with the gender for which they identify. And through these conversations about the new high school, we received feedback from a staff member that they had been spoken to, blocked, different things happened with them choosing restrooms. So I reached out to some members who were involved with this original policy and confirmed that it was not intentional to exclude this. And so I was making the recommendation that because we had in our other policy, because we've had an issue that has come up recently, we wanted to include it here.
Mr. Green.
This feels like a fairly non-controversial change, so I would move to waive the second reading and move to approve.
Second.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Green, seconded by Dr. Ackman. So a formal motion to amend. Ms. Batone, do we need that? Okay. Okay. Is there any other questions or discussion about this proposed change? It would be adding what was in red. I don't know if you have it in front of you in red, that one sentence. Ms. Barish?
I just have some concerns about other language in this policy that I think deserves some revisiting, but I'm in favor of this amendment, absolutely. Can we revisit this amendment in other ways later? But soon? Or does it make sense to do everything at once?
Can you say a little bit more about what your concerns are?
Absolutely. So in the paragraph above the red line item, the language says the district will support them in preferred gender pronoun use preferred name, etc. I think that the thinking around preferred has evolved based on some reading that I've done recently, and I don't know that preferred is really appropriate here. Other options are correct or chosen because preferred suggests that there is another option. If someone says, what is your preferred meeting date? You say what you'd prefer, but that means other things are open. And I just think that while we're looking at this policy, it may make sense to make a few other changes at the same time.
Do you have other changes that you'd want to suggest beyond the preferred?
Maybe even in the redlined bit where it says all Somerville Public School staff are able to use the facilities or restrooms, et cetera. Are able, maybe it should be more forceful. Will, must be allowed to, just to make it a little more firm.
Thank you for those comments. Dr. Ackman? Did you have your? Okay. All right. So here's what I'm going to suggest is we will have this on the next agenda. Any wordsmithing changes, and I don't mean that in a belittling way, please come prepared. I think that the tweaks, you were right, the conversation as a community has evolved since we passed this. but I think it's a fairly simple one, but I don't want to get into wordsmithing it together right now as a group. That has never worked out well for us. So it'll be on the next agenda. If you have any changes, amendments that you would like to include, I would encourage you to send them to Ms. Santiago ahead of time so we can look at them. Ms. Patone.
But also, there were a couple of things that I also had issues with, but I kind of held back because I wanted to just get this one thing in, and I'm okay with holding it off for another week. It's fine with me. One term that came up when I was doing my research was gender nonconforming. Not everyone accepts that as a term either. Apparently, there's some communities that prefer gender expansive. So maybe some of these ideas can be sent to Catherine, and maybe somebody can bring them to the GSA, or because they were really part of developing this. At the time, I decided to just put this in because I didn't want to open the can of worms, but.
Are you suggesting prior to voting on it that we should, it would be helpful to talk with the GSA before we vote on this?
I think it would. They were part of developing the policy, and because this is it's really fluid and it's really moving.
Right.
Like I said, I did this research, and some didn't like the non-conforming. Some people didn't have any issue with it, so I just want to take care with it.
Dr. Ackman?
So I actually have a concern because it's a policy about the staff bringing it to the student GSA. Like, that would be my concern. Like, if we want to, in the same language, revisit the student policy that we've crafted, that's fine. But like, if it's a policy about our staff, I have a concern about bringing it to.
So here,
I agree with you. I got confused. I'm just trying to come up with a way to be inclusive and make sure that we're not kind of running with the boat on our own and maybe missing it. Thanks.
So here is my suggestion, and I believe that there's policies, it's always good to revisit, and some will be changing more quickly than others. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. If you have those concerns, if you have people you want to talk to bring language, that would be fantastic, but make sure you get them to Catherine the Thursday, ideally the Wednesday by noon before that next meeting, so that gives you a week and a half. I think we're all in agreement in the spirit, but we're trying to be respectful about the language. That seems to be the mood. Okay. Thank you very much, and we will put that on the next agenda. Thank you for bringing this up, Ms. Patone. Student Opportunity Act. I don't think it's a long item. Is there any? Just that we have to do it in that there was a time, like a two sentence, I think.
Through Madam Chair. So the Student Opportunity Act, there is a budget of about $158,000 that we will be getting as part of our budget. This is, as you know, through the governor's budget and some of the changes that were made with Chapter 70. Mr. Mazza has been working with various department heads to look at the budget and to look at the different categories that the state has allocated that we can spend the dollars on. In some, the state laid out a process where every district school committee needs to vote on how the dollars will be spent. In most districts, it's for much larger pots of money. In our district, it really is, I mean, every dollar matters, but in our district, it really is going toward things that are already continuing to be worked through. So I know Mr. Mazza has a couple of updates of the couple of key categories that we're looking to spend the additional dollars on.
Mr. Mazza.
Through you, Madam Chair. So yes, I've been meeting with different department heads really to focus on different subgroups because as you can see in this document, which is, since we are getting less than $1 million, we have to complete the short form, which is about 2 pages, which you have in front of you. Commitment 1 is focusing on student subgroups. So one of the pieces that we're focusing on has to do with college and career readiness at the high school level. And then the other piece is on Tier 3 supports, which basically encompasses all students that we have. So we have 2 different pieces that we have been working on as a district and will continue to work on. You know, we have evidence-based practice programs. Those 2 pieces are, the state had given some guidance on that to choose from the ones that they had created and thought were the most research-based. And then you have to create a budget around how you would spend that money. One of the other pieces, or 2 of the other pieces, are looking at how you monitor success and looking at your your metrics, your outcome metrics, and your targets. And then the fourth is engaging all families in the process that we had gone through over the past couple of years has encompassed all of these. So what we will do is on the 23rd, you will have this completed document and our plan to use the student opportunity money to move our students forward, and you will be voting on it on the 23rd.
So that was an explanation and a heads up. Dr. Phillips.
Sorry, just a question from my constituents. I know in the guidance to the plan writing, it talks about needing to get input from stakeholders, including educators, and they were wondering how we're getting input from educators. So if you could just speak to that real quickly, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Mazza.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So I didn't hear the one part. Are we getting input from educators? Is that what you asked?
How?
How? So we had undergone the process of interviewing staff and involving them in the design process for both of these two goals that we have around the college and career and around Tier 3 supports. So it's been a consistent process throughout. So we will definitely satisfy having all stakeholders involved, sure.
Thank you for that. Ms. Baton.
Just through you, Madam Chair, to
Superintendent.
just also reiterate that part of the reason why we're getting fewer dollars, substantially fewer dollars, is because in general, our budgets are always well above, and our pupil allocation is well above it. So this is not going to come as a separate sum through the city. This is going to come as part of our budget. So in our case, the feedback we're getting is through our budget process. And so it's really, when you think about it, every school's been doing this with their ILTs, with their school site councils. So we're not separating out the $158,000 because it's really just part of the budget. But rather, we're looking at the priorities of the budget process, and then we're putting these particular dollars toward those priorities.
Thank you for that explanation. Ms. Patone, do you have can't even get a sentence out. Somerville High School Building Committee report. I know it's brief. I think we have a more extensive one scheduled for later in the year.
Yeah, I have a brief report.
Thank you.
To you, Chair Norman, and I encourage Superintendent Skipper to chime in at any moment. So the biggest thing, obviously, on everybody's mind is the schedule. And phase one, which is sort of the back side and part of the front side on the south, is on schedule. Phase two is on schedule for July 31st, but the schedule is super tight. So phase two is the new building that you're seeing kind of in the front and the southern part. And, good weather and no surprises will help maintain that schedule, but we'll see. But they're monitoring it very closely, and they're putting significant resources on this project. And the weather has been good, so hopefully we have our next building committee meeting on Monday, so I hope that we get good news. Just wanted to mention, if people hadn't heard, the War Memorial Building will not be complete for occupation in September for the school year. They often reference this as a phase 2A. It's the southernmost building, the one that sticks out right now, that's going to be repurposed and renovated. They found additional contaminated materials that require abatement, but more significantly, the structural steel supporting the building was deemed insufficient. So they've had to double the amount of steel, which also is going to add an additional expense. Just for reference, the War Memorial Building was part of sort of the historic perspective on this project. Most recently, it's the building that served as the library and had previous incarnations as an auditorium and also, I think, a gym way back when. The specifics about what is going to be impacted in September is there are some career and technical education classes that are housed in the basement of that building, so cosmetology and barbering, as well as the TV production studio for the city, as well as some life skills courses for special ed students. The district and the project team are looking to options for temporary placements for these classes at the start of school if that's deemed necessary. The goal is not to bus any students to the Edgerly next year. Although we're still outfitted to provide cosmetology and barbering in the Edgerly. And extending, just for reference, we're going to make a decision in the next couple of months about extending the modular trailer rentals and whether or not that's going to be beneficial, and that would cost another $20,000 per month to keep but we have that opportunity. The second item was multi-stall non-gendered bathrooms. So the current building design from the get-go has included 30 non-gendered single-use bathrooms. However, there's been a request made by the GSA, which stands for Gay/Straight and Gender/Sexuality Awareness Alliance, to include one multi-stall, all-gendered bathroom near or adjacent to a common area in the building. Julia Post, who is a teacher at the high school and the club advisor, made a presentation to the building committee outlining the reasons for the request. And instead of me trying to repurpose it, I'm going to just take a quote from the presentation, is that they felt like the current plan was inequitable. It is separate but not equal. We deserve multiple stalls. We deserve common area bathrooms. Single-use, all-gendered bathrooms are, quote, othered. So that was from their presentation, and it was a very compelling presentation, particularly talked about how students that are gender expansive or trans have some really high rate of incidences in bathrooms of negative experiences, and their goal is to try to normalize the idea of gender neutral bathrooms. Their goal is to have one in the new building. And they're also concerned there's only one all-gender changing room in the locker room areas for the new high school, and I know the superintendent has been looking in that issue with the staff. So their proposal requested converting 2 gendered multi-stall bathrooms into a single non-gendered multi-stall bathroom. With this proposal, the multi-stall gendered bathrooms and multi-stall non-gendered bathrooms would both be available. So the idea is not necessarily to eliminate access to gendered multi-stall bathrooms, but to create convert a combination of 2 bathrooms and make it to one non-gendered bathroom. So the project team is looking into the feasibility. The SMMA is setting up a meeting with the plumbing board to review, and noted that we don't necessarily have space to swap out urinals with toilets. So they're really looking into the details of whether or not this is something that we could do right at school opening, or whether it might have to be something that has to be retrofitted in the future if this is a decision that the district wants to make. The project team is also going to be looking into potential cost and schedule impact if they determine that this modification is feasible. And the school department, in conjunction with the building committee, would make the decision about whether or not to do this. The school department is in discussion with the city to how engage the community on the topic if they determine it's feasible. So I just wanted to give everybody, I know you probably heard different things within the community about this interest in this idea. That's my report. I was compelled by their presentation, and I did some research, and there are other districts out there that have multi-stall non-gendered bathrooms, and I talked to at least one person who was part of the transition in Montclair, New Jersey, and they said they had no issues with it. So I think there's some concern that some people in the community there might be some discomfort, and we need to be sensitive to that, but I guess I've kind of gone through the process and feel like if we can do this, I'd love to see it happen, but I respectfully, I respect the community and the decision within the process, so thank you.
Thank you for your report, and thank you for serving on this committee, which is a significant time commitment, and especially during this very time-sensitive time. Yes.
I apologize, I forgot to add that I did not give a financial update. I apologize. They're really, it's a very deep process negotiating with the providers and the contractors to determine the impact of all these delays. And so none of that has been finalized yet, and so we'll see whether or not we're going to be on budget or over, and we'll be happy to share that when we have more information.
Thank you so much for that, and we'll be looking to you for updates month by month. Hooray for no snow this year, or very little. It's been great. Very helpful. Thank you for that. I will now move on to item number D, the Scale ADP diploma request.
I move to accept the superintendent's recommendation to grant a ADP diploma to Joseph Michael Pastorino of Reading, Massachusetts.
There's a motion by Mr. Green, seconded by Ms. Batone. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? We have another diploma awarded. Thank you very much. Acceptance of donations.
Move to accept with gratitude the following donations. A monetary donation from Timothy Finn of Somerville, Massachusetts for $650 for the Somerville High School trip to Puerto Rico. A donation from Annie Carlson and Doug Goldberg from Bethesda, Maryland of $200 to for the Somerville High School trip to Puerto Rico, and a monetary donation from Tom Matthews of Canton, Ohio of $1,250 for the Somerville High School trip to Puerto Rico.
There's a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Batone. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The donations are accepted. Thank you so much for your generosity. Are there items from board members? Ms. Batone?
Two things. One, I just wanted to acknowledge the team at Somerville High School that ran the Latin dance event last week. I think they raised over $800 for the Puerto Rico trip. So kudos. I actually attended it, and my husband and I did some tango lessons. Nice. It's pretty hilarious. And the second thing, I just want to encourage my colleagues. It got added to the packet, the planning document for ed programs. So we've been working on laying out all the things that we're going to look into, including department and program report outs. And so if any of my colleagues can look at this, and if there's anything that they see that they feel like should be prioritized, or things that they're more interested in than what we've put together here, very much appreciated, because we're meeting in 2 weeks right before the regular, so before I do my report out from last time. So it's in the packet now, and so if you want to check that out, I'd really appreciate it, and any feedback. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chair of the Ed Programs. Dr. Phillips.
Through you, Madam Chair, it was brought to our attention that there was a hiccup with after-school registration at the Kennedy School last week or the week before. My understanding is that in the system, the enrollment target was just set too low, and we're working to raise that. That made me wonder, though, if I could just get some clarity on how are we setting our enrollment caps for non-subsidized and subsidized slots. I'd heard it was space, but then space is no longer an issue. So wondering about that, and also wondering about the after-school bus. I've heard one exists, but I'm wondering, where does it go? Who can access it? More information on that.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'll have to get you the information on the after-school. I don't know what the actual cap is that they're setting. What I do know is it's the second time we've had a glitch in a second school. One happened at the beginning of the year as well. It seems like there's a few little things in the system that are really finicky. So it wasn't an actual space issue. It was really just the software, but nonetheless, people obviously had a response to it. So the minute we found it out, we corrected it. And we just always encourage that if somebody, that happens, to just reach out to somebody. In terms of the bus, we have an ELL bus that runs, we have actually two that run the last route. So they go in two different directions. One starts from the Healy and goes toward the Winter Hill side. The other goes AFA and goes down through Winter Hill. So that's because of the way the SEI programs run. So we have let other students go on to those buses on a rare occasion, but they're really for the ELL students.
Thank you for that. Ms. Batone?
I apologize. I just wanted to announce that the next building committee meeting is Monday, March 16th at 4:30 in the high school trailers. Public is invited, and there's also a public comment period during that meeting. But also after that meeting, from 6:30 to 8 on, God, I got the dates wrong. Isn't it right after that meeting?
It is.
I wrote 13th, sorry. On the same day, March 16th, from 6:30 to 8, there's going to be a community meeting to discuss remaining Somerville High School construction in the Somerville High School cafeteria. They identified that anybody's welcome to attend, but is primarily intended for neighbors who live and work near the high school construction site. The presentation will focus on logistic plans and anticipated impacts of construction over the next several months.
Thank you for that. Ms. Krepchen?
Just had a quick, relatively simple procedural question. In reading over all of our policies and procedures, occasionally I noticed a fairly simple typo. And I'm just wondering if there's something like that, is there an easy process to just fix those, or does it have to re-amend? Can I just send them to Catherine and she'll fix the typo?
You can send them right to Catherine. If it's clearly a typo, that is, we thank you for your editorial skills, and we can fix those easily. Thank you. Are there condolences? Okay.
The Somerville School Committee would like to extend its deepest condolences to the families of Arthur Francis Hughes, retired teacher and principal, of Charlton West Junior High, Cutler, Conwell, and Kennedy schools, and to Andre Green and his family for the death of Alice Janian, I hope I didn't mess that up, grandmother of Jessica Green, and who is the wife of Andre Green, a school committee member.
We are adjourned.